All right, welcome everyone to our November edition of the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia chapter of the ACRL Professional Development web series. Our guest today is Travis Williamson. Travis is a UI designer for the WVU libraries, and Travis is here to present to us a day in the life of a UI designer, applying digital usability design in your library. And so without further ado, Travis, the floor is yours. And thank you again for presenting for us.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Rocco. It's nice to meet you somewhat via Zoom. If y'all see me looking over here, I have a second screen, so I'm not just looking up at my ceiling. But yeah, with that, I will get started here. Let me share my screen. Okay. My phone doesn't go off. Okay. Screen. All right. Can everyone see that? All right, no dissent. I'll take that as a thank you, thank you. So let me move this as well. Yeah, so my name is Travis Williamson, and today I'm going to kind of be walking through a day in the life of a UI designer, kind of what I do in a day and how that kind of applies to libraries' websites. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, a little bit about me. So currently, I work as a UI designer for the West Virginia University Libraries. Before that, I worked in digital marketing, both for the libraries as well. And then in some private sector stuff before that, I also did a little bit of journalism for the Exponent Telegram here in West Virginia. In addition to working for WVU, I got my education here, my undergrad, and then additionally, I got an MBA in Integrated Marketing Communications. I've also done some coursework for an MFA in graphic design here. All this has given me a really good opportunity to get hands-on experience in creating and promoting digital spaces. So with that, we want to ask, what is UX and UI design? Broadly speaking, UX stands for user experience, whereas UI stands for user interface design. There's some kind of debate in the design field on whether or not these should be separate or together, but there are a couple differences. With user experience design, you kind of work on the overall architecture of the website, how a user will navigate it and their overall experience while they're on the website. Whereas a UI designer works with the interfaces with which they'll navigate the site. So menus, layouts, all that. Both of these, there's a lot of crossing between the two of them. So for this presentation, I'll be using them interchangeably. But overall, it is kind of creating the interfaces and experiences of a website or digital space that a user will navigate during their time on the site. A little bit better of a definition, or something that kind of gets more to the heart of what UX and UI design is a quote from Steve Krug from his book, Don't Make Me Think. In it, he says, UX is improving how useful, easy, pleasant, marketable, or addictive it is to use a product. And, you know, with the difference between UX and UI, this is kind of the core of it all, is making usable, enjoyable websites that help a user accomplish a goal that they're trying to achieve. And again, there's a lot of roles that can go into UX and UI design. In addition to the design aspect, there's research, sometimes just overall graphic design. But with that, there's a couple philosophies that I found super helpful that kind of serve as a guiding light through all those. And I always go back to these to try to make sure I'm always on the right path in any of the facets of the job that I am doing. Both of these come from Donald A. Norman in his book, The Design of Everyday Things. This book, in addition to the last one I mentioned, Don't Make Me Think, are two kind of design Bibles. I have two dog-eared copies beside me right now. If you are interested in this, I heavily recommend picking them up. They're also just quite interesting in seeing how, you know, the the design of everyday things, the design philosophy that not just goes into websites, but everything around us. In the first one, he says, good design is actually a lot harder to notice than poor design, in part because good designs fit our needs so well that the design is invisible. He also says two of the most important characteristics of good design are discoverability and understanding. And the two underlying principles in these are the idea of invisible design and universal design. With invisible design, like he says, the only time a user really notices the design of a website is when something has gone wrong. And ideally, a digital space should just be a conduit for a person when they get to the site and finding what they're looking for. It should just make the path as linear as possible and as quick as possible. So ultimately, we want design to be a thankless job. We don't want people to really see all the labor that went into it, because it should be easy, intuitive, responsive, and efficient. And the second one is the idea of universal design, which is very important for us as a library too. We deal with a lot of people, and many of which have encounter accessibility issues. So the idea of accessibility is super important. And with universal design, it states that by creating products and designs that fit the largest audience possible, or those that might encounter accessibility issues, we in turn make the site better for everyone. A good example of universal design is actually the doorknob. If you think of the traditional doorknob where you grab it and you have to turn it, people with mobility issues, it might be a little bit difficult. So a solution to that is, a door handle we see in a lot of more public spaces, probably in your libraries as well, which is the flat kind of lever that you can use. So for people who might have mobility issues in their hands, it's a lot easier. There's different ways to open it, but in doing that, we make something that is better for everyone. Say you're bringing in groceries, and you only have your elbow. As a person who may not have those mobility issues, the design of an improved door handle still allows it for everyone to be able to use it in a variety of ways. So with the philosophy, how do we kind of break that out into a framework that we can use? These are 7 things we want every website or digital product to have. And I kind of use this as a checklist, before and after I make a site, to see if it achieves all these things. So when we make a site, it should be useful, learnable, memorable, effective, desirable, and delightful and efficient. So first off, useful. Does it do something that people need done? There is numerous sites that can help someone accomplish what they're looking for. With libraries, we kind of have a captive audience sometimes with, people need login credentials to use our research tool, and those are often restricted. But, Google Scholar is always kind of lurking in the corner. So we want to make sure when someone's trying to accomplish a goal, say looking for an article, we want to make sure that the website we have allows people to accomplish that goal. Secondly, we want to make sure that the website is both learnable and memorable. And a concept that kind of helps guide this is the idea of mental maps. And what a mental map is a user's predefined understanding of how a website should work, despite how it does work. And our goal as designers is to make the site match someone's mental map as much as possible. So a way that we can do that is to use kind of predefined web standards or practices that are kind of commonplace in most websites. As a designer, your first inkling can kind of be to reinvent the wheel, make something that's aesthetically pleasing as well. But it's best to kind of put the pride aside in that and to use a lot of standard web conventions that allow people to feel comfortable using your site. Some examples of this are creating a landing page with several jumping off points for different content. Another one that is ubiquitous now is the hamburger menu. You know, the 3 lines that you see at the top of a website, especially in mobile, where you engage it, then it has a drop-down navigation. So by making something that's learnable and memorable, we want to make sure that it fits standard web conventions and that people can navigate it comfortably. And if they do stray off the path of what they're looking for, they can easily get back to a starting point. You know, with websites, there's no user manual. Even if there was, people probably wouldn't read it. So we want to make sure the layout of the design is self-explanatory and people can get to where they need to be without really thinking about it. Next is effective and efficient. As I mentioned, Google Scholar is always in the corner. And with that, you know, people will just type in the search and find what they want. And it might not be exactly what they need because they might not have the same resources that we do as libraries. But if people run into some frustrations using our library search tools, they might as easily just go and find something that is just okay through another avenue. So we want to make sure that not only can users accomplish their goals, but they can do so effectively and efficiently. And the last 2 are a little more esoteric, but still very important: desirable and delightful. You know, websites kind of have a 15-second rule for a landing page where if people can't find what they want, or if they don't feel like they're on the right path, within 15 seconds, they'll most likely just leave. So we want to make the process of finding something as desirable and delightful as possible. That can deal with, you know, the overall layout, load times, making sure there's not broken links. So always being abreast of that is super important as well. So how do we implement this in practice? With this is kind of a point A to point Z when designing a website. These are kind of the roles that you would do when designing a website and ensuring that it's usable. I want to kind of go through these, give it some examples of how you can do this and the tools that you can use for these tasks. So the first is research. Before we even design a website, we want to get a little bit of a background on who will be using it and how we can tailor it to our users. You know, are we going to, say, be making a archives portal that's mostly used by researchers and academics? That's going to look a little different than something that might be a search tool for undergraduates. So with this, you'll collect data in order to form a working hypothesis of the website that you're going to create. One tool that I find very useful for this is user personas. And I will be switching screens here really quickly. Share new screen. Okay. All right. So there are many tools like this online, but this is one of my favorite, and it's by HubSpot. They offer a lot of different marketing tools. But this one is for creating a user persona, which are huge in both marketing and design. And with these, we can kind of build a little layout of who our users are going to be. And it's something that we can always reference while we're creating our product to make sure that it's that the product aligns with our user base and how they'll use it. So, you know, just kind of as a little example here, can build a tool here, and it neatly lays out kind of a lot of points here for your user, you know, name, job title, level of education, but their job responsibilities, the tools they need to do their job, their preferred method of communication. So this is super helpful if you are looking at creating a website or refining your website as a jumping off point to kind of better understand your users. And this is a good little dashboard to be able to use that. Okay, share back to the presentation here. So once you do, understand what your users are looking for, it is time to get into the fun stuff. So that's the information architecture, wireframes, and the mock-up. And this is my favorite part of the job, where you can kind of organize what the website content and workflows are going to be like, and then make a graphic representation of what the website will look like. But while it's enjoyable, this can also be a pretty intimidating part, depending on how big your website is. And this is especially true for libraries. We can have a lot of content, which can be difficult to organize. And you know, the tried and true pen and paper of kind of making a little diagram often doesn't work for a lot of content, especially if you're trying to figure out how to organize it and reorganize it. So another tool that I use for this is something called card sorting. This is a super helpful website as well. Let me share it. And it is from a design organization called IDEO. And in this, they have a whole design kit with a lot of different tools to help you design intuitive and usable products. But this one is called card sorting. And pretty much what you're going to do here is you're going to take a pack of note cards, and for every single web page you have, you're going to write on that note card. And then with a big desk space or a floor, you're going to kind of put it out, sort it how you want it. So this is a good way to get started, and it allows you to, you know, ideate and tweak the structure of the website without really putting anything to pen and paper. So whenever I do design a website, this is super helpful. Back to the... next is the mock-up. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but you're going to make full-scale, full-color depictions of the website. You know, before you really get into the coding, this is helpful because when you are making the site, there's a lot of stakeholders in it, and you want to be able to run by kind of the design prototype and what you're doing before you really get into the nitty-gritty of the coding. After that is the coding. As a user interface designer or as a front-end developer, you're mostly going to be working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So yeah, that's when you get into the coding. After that, ideally, our site is at its finished product. While that's not really true, there's a lot of tweaking that goes on with it. Next, we want to get into things like accessibility, branding, testing, and iteration of it. So as I mentioned before, accessibility is super important. As a university, we actually have to meet WCAG standards. They have 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. So whenever we do make a website and we get it up, we always want to check for accessibility issues. There is a very helpful tool that we use for this called Site Improve. There are other accessibility checkers, but Site Improve is super helpful because they have a Chrome widget here. So when you ever have a website up, you can click it and it brings a little drop down here of any accessibility issues that you might have. So for this site here, you know, we are at AA and we really don't have any accessibility issues. But if we were to bring it up to AAA, there's certain things that we can do, such as increasing contrast. So, but overall, this tool is super helpful in being able to look at your website for accessibility issues. Not only can it kind of get you in trouble, but this goes back to universal design. By making sure that our websites are usable for those who might have accessibility issues, we in turn make it better for everyone. Again, this might deal with things like alt tags. If you have an image for screen readers, you need to have an alternative text for it. This can also deal with things like, as mentioned, color contrast. So in making these better for people who say might have color blindness in some form or fashion, we still make it better for everyone else by ensuring that it is accessible for all. And then branding is the next one. So as a university, I imagine all of you have at one point dealt with your branding department. Sometimes it can be frustrating making sure something meets brand standards, but ultimately it is helpful to the end product. Not only does it kind of align visually with a university or an institution as a whole, but it also allows users to know that they're kind of within the same structure. Say you make a website look completely different from every other university website. While it might be aesthetically pleasing, it might cause some confusion and frustration for users, wondering if they're in the right place. Did they get sent to an external link that might not be useful for them? So branding, while it can be frustrating sometimes, making sure it's, you know, to a T with your organization, in the end, it's super helpful. And lastly is testing and iteration. When you design a website, it is a living organism, and there is, you know, never really an endpoint. You always want to refine and iterate on what you've had to make it better. We are actually currently doing this for a website we're making, the American Congress Digital Archives portal, which is a collection of congressional archives that we are creating within the university libraries. And with this, we're doing focus groups, user interviews, when we're having them complete a couple tasks and ask them a couple questions. We've done about 5 of these now, but we've got a lot of really useful feedback on just the general design, features that they might want, how it stacks up to portals they've used in the past. So testing iteration is crucial, and it's something that you're always going to be doing. Let me see here. So here are some of the resources that I've used for the presentation, but before we go any further, I do want to kind of show an example of how we've used some of these design principles in some of our own websites. So back to here, this is an exhibit we recently made for our Art in the Libraries. I see Sally Brown is in here as well. I worked with her on it. And this is an exhibit, an online exhibit for our food justice in Appalachia. And I'm going to compare this to a previous iteration of our Art in the Library site, which we have since changed. But I wanted to use this to kind of compare and contrast the two and show how we have implemented some of these design principles and how they've helped us. So with the old site, we have our landing page here. We have some things that you would expect to see in any website. We have a header, a nav bar, and then some content here. With this website, on our homepage, we had our current exhibits. So these are all the exhibits that we had going on currently in the library, which took up most of all of our homepage, aside from the footer and the nav bar. Comparatively, with the Food Justice in Appalachia exhibit, instead of just having one form of content on the front page, we wanted to give users a bunch of different jumping off points. As I mentioned before, when someone goes to a website, you have about 15 seconds before they're going to hop off. So by giving people a lot of different content segments of what they might want to look at is very helpful. It's also more usable too, because you want to give people multiple avenues to achieve their goal. So this one example, we have a little masthead here with or a hero here with where people can view the virtual exhibit. We have a little bit about the exhibit. We have a featured exhibit here, and a little note here about the WVU Food Lab, who we worked with on this project. So by having these, it gives people a little preview of the different types of content that are on the site. It kind of explains what exists on the site, and it allows them to jump off if they have, if they want to find further about that information. And if it's not what they're looking for, they can kind of jump back and easily navigate it. You know, compared to the old site where we just have one form of content, we thought that was super helpful to be able to allow people to find what they want more efficiently and make it a little more usable. In addition to that, accessibility issues. With this old site, we did run into some accessibility issues. So by using the accessibility checker, we are able to kind of take note of that in the newer iterations of the websites, ensure that we don't have any issues by AA standards. Another thing that we did in this one is in order to kind of meet users' mental maps, I mentioned kind of the hamburger menu. With this old site, instead of a hamburger, when you go to mobile, it just has a little arrow, which might be a little confusing to people. Whereas in this new site, we have kind of the standard, hamburger, open up the menu. And we also did things like, we refined the code a little bit to decrease loading time. With this old site, we were working with it for a while. So we had a lot of content. And since initially it wasn't coded as elegantly as it could have been, if you click on a link, we dealt with some pretty long load times. Let's link here. Let me go. So, and this is a little slower since it is an archived website. We did deal with this, but, say you click on the about here, we had some larger image sizes and all that. So it took a while for the content to load, and that overall kind of decreases the desirability of the website, which will turn people off and have them go somewhere else. Whereas in this one, if you do go, about the exhibit, loads a little quicker. We have kind of blocked off content here. And overall, this has kind of resulted in lower bounce rate. A bounce rate is people who leave your website shortly after, or they leave a page shortly after going to it. So the lower the bounce rate, the better. So ideally with the bounce rate, you want to get somewhere between 20 and 40%, which means only 20 to 40% of the people who are going to your website are immediately leaving after arriving at it. And with the newer iterations of this site and the exhibit, we did see a lower bounce rate. Google Analytics is super helpful. You can kind of plug that into any website, and that allows you to kind of to see the numbers to make sure that what you're not doing is in vain, and it can also be a little bit encouraging as well. So with that, that's about all I had, and wanted to see if anyone had any questions. And if there are no questions, I think that'll be it for me.
Righty, thank you so much. Please virtual please a virtual round of applause for Travis, because that was tremendous. Thank you so much, Travis. Oh, we do have a question now.
Oh,
we have a question from Elizabeth James asking, do you have any internal accessibility guidelines that you distribute to content creators?
We do not, because in terms of accessibility, we usually deal with it more on our end as the web team. However, we use kind of a web structure called Clean Slate, which lays a lot of that out for users. In the past, we have had documentation that we have given to people, but honestly, that's something that we probably should do a little bit better. But it can definitely be helpful depending on how many people are working on the website and the scope of the website, to kind of have a little usability checklist, such things as like alt tags, or just say you're using AP style. It can definitely be helpful if you do have a lot of different people adding content, and sometimes just a tried and true PDF can work for that. UX and UI roles in the libraries. I'm not sure for other libraries. I think it definitely depends on the size of the library. For me, there's just one. So, and we are a pretty large institution. So I think if there is a web team within a library that doesn't have it, they probably should. I think it's something that having someone who is more focused on the design is always helpful. But for a lot of universities, the build out of their websites is done by the university's web team as a whole. We're lucky enough because we do develop a lot of different tools for our libraries that we do have our own web team. So if your library does have a web team or a team that does create digital products, I think that a UX and UI role should be common if that does exist. Okay, one from communication systems department within the library. Okay, perfect. All right.
I'll add, just in case the chat doesn't come over the video, and I'm sorry, that's my fault, for benefit of anyone watching the recording. The last response was in response to the question, how common are UX and UI roles in library settings? And I apologize to Travis and Suzanne for missing stating that for the question.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about. I'm not sure how common they are in other libraries, but if you do have a web team, that's where I think you should definitely have a UI or a UX person. Okay.
Okay, are there any further questions for Travis before we wrap up? Going once, going twice. Sold to the person in the top hat. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you again, Travis, for this excellent presentation. If you're interested in presenting for our professional development web series, or any other information about it and where they're posted on YouTube, I've posted just a few links in the chat. Those links are also usually available in our promotion emails. Again, thank you so much. And if you ever have any questions about the series or participating in the series, please feel free to email me, Rocco Kermenes, at rocco.kermenes@sru.edu. Thanks again, everyone.
And have a good one.